Some new faces here, and I want to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about Americans United for Separation of Church and State and a little bit about the Delaware Valley chapter before I introduce the star of this evening, Fran Pierce. Americans United was founded way back in 1947 by a coalition of educators, religious leaders, and church leaders for the sole purpose of guaranteeing all of us our constitutional right to practice a religion of our choice or refrain from practicing as our conscience dictates. AU is centered in Washington, D.C., and we are the only national group that devotes 100% of our time and resources to church-state separation issues. And also, I want to make it clear up front that we are not anti-religious. Our members represent a broad cross-section of beliefs, and we have many non-believers as well. The Delaware Valley chapter has really two mandates. We educate and we act as constitutional eyes and ears for the national organization. Constitutionally, just quickly, some of the issues that we're watching here locally. This seems like this issue of school vouchers just keeps going on and on and on in both New Jersey and Pennsylvania. We watch the voucher issue very closely. If you're not familiar with school vouchers, they are no more than a backdoor way of funneling taxpayer dollars to fund religious schools. Approximately 80 to 90% of voucher dollars go to mostly Catholic schools, by the way, but religious schools. So that's, we take a stand there. That's unconstitutional. Taxpayer dollars should not be going to religious schools. So we have held debates, many lectures, a lot of letter writing campaigns, and the issue just never dies. A couple other issues that we watch in Pennsylvania is that there's a couple of House bills that were introduced last year, a couple of toxic House bills. One is House Resolution 535 that proclaimed 2012 the year of the Bible. And if that wasn't bad enough, later on in 2012, they came along and they came up with House Resolution 922 that proclaimed October 2012 as the month of prayer. Clearly, this is a violation of, first of all, Pennsylvania's Constitution that clearly says that Pennsylvania's legislature should not give any precedence to any religious organizations, any religious beliefs, and it's a direct violation of our First Amendment religious clause, of our First Amendment to our Constitution. It's too late to do anything about those bills today. They were non-binding resolutions. However, personally, I've taken it upon myself to see that this doesn't happen again, and I've instituted a little letter writing campaign on my own, and in fact, I've been in touch with two local representatives. Steve Santaserio is one of them. Another one is Cohen from here in Philadelphia, and I'm trying to put together, from their suggestion, a trip that Reverend Tom Beers and I will take to Harrisburg. Tom Beers is a Baptist minister who is a member of our Clergy Advisory Board. We'd like to go to Harrisburg and do a little training session for our legislature and just give them a little primer on what does church-state separation mean. Apparently these guys need it. Something else that we've been watching very closely, and I'm not going to steal Fran's thunder here, but we've been doing a lot of work in watching this stealth evangelism issue very closely. This is the third in our series of workshops on this issue, and as Fran will show, it's a nasty little malignancy that's spreading through our schools. As far as education, the Delaware Valley chapter is very active. We host speakers, we host workshops, we host debates, and if you look on your little sheet that Janice put together, just very quickly, some of the events that we have coming up. On February 24th, Ellery Shemp is blessing us with a visit to town, and Janice brought him here. Janice was part
of it. And I'm speaking on it.
Oh, and Janice is speaking.
I'm sharing the stage with Ellery Shemp.
Speaking with him, Shemp was the first, one of the first getting prayer out of school cases, and Shemp was the plaintiff. So this guy is a classic church-state separation, good guy. I haven't met him, but I've read.
Abington, the guy from Abington?
Yeah, Abington versus Shemp.
Yep, Abington versus Shem, back in
61, 62, 61. I'm really bad with the dates. Something like that.
So that's a must-see, February 24th, First Unitarian Church. I'll be visiting the Lehigh Humanists in Allentown on Sunday, March 3rd. I'll be giving a talk on the evolution controversy and its church-state separation issues. I'm sure everybody will be there in Allentown.
Allentown.
At 10:30 on Sunday morning. Yeah. Good to hear. Yeah, sounds like a good group.
It's
They
on
get a
our
good-
meetup, Greg.
get a
It's on
good
the
crowd.
church-state separation meetup.
Yeah, I'm a member of the.
Oh, good. Okay.
Oh, cool. I have a slick PowerPoint display for that. Then our bi-monthly meeting in the Jenkintown Library will alternate between here 1 month, then we go to Jenkintown Library the next month, back and forth. We are fortunate to have
Dean Miller.
Dean Miller.
I didn't put
Name
Dean's
on here?
name. No, I didn't have room.
Oh, that's okay. Dean Miller, who is also on our board of directors. Dean is an author, a good thinker, and he's been doing some writing and thinking on the Good News Club. I have a feeling that's going to be his second book on the Good News Club. He's going to be talking on his book. Good guy, Dean.
What's his book?
It's his first one. His first one, I forget the name of it, but
Forget
he
the
spoke
name
on
of it. He
just
gave
some
us a
general,
lecture about it. Yeah.
general thing about the religious right and all the nasty things they can do if you don't keep your eye on.
Yeah.
Something like that. And then, excellent talk coming up on April 3rd, right here at 7 p.m. Arthur Kaplan. Arthur Kaplan is one of the lead attorneys on the Boy Scout case that is percolating now here in Philadelphia. Good guy. The name of his talk is Boy Scouts, Be Prepared for Inequality. Have to see that. And then the next is really, this was Janice's fault. That's my fault. That date is out of whack. I'm sorry. It's really David's fault. He's hosting this. That should say March 18th. I apologize. So the next one, so Ed Joyce to debate. That one should read March 18th. This is at Drexel University, being sponsored by David and his crowd over at Drexel. These debates are good, and I felt strongly that DVAU should make an effort to reach out to college-age people, and we found a number of times that a good way to attract younger folks is through debates. They seem to like that, the bloodletting and the
Making fun of the guys who are wrong on the other side, you know.
However, unlike a couple of other debates that I've had, which were pretty got a little crazy. Debating, Janice was involved with the religious right. These guys were not good debaters. They would not hold the line on what they were supposed to be debating. But anyway, this fella is a law professor from thank you, from Villanova. He's a constitutional attorney, and although he favors church-state separation, he's just not as strong on the stand as Americans United. So him and I found some issues that we could be on the other side of the fence on, and we're calling it a conversation on church-state issues. So it's going to be more of a cerebral, tamed, and enlightening debate rather than some of the others we've been involved in. And last but not least is a must-attend event for anyone interested in church-state separation issues. This is our annual Church-State Issues Symposium. In bold at the bottom there, April 20th. It's an all-day event at the National Constitution Center. We have an all-star lineup of speakers. We have speakers representing a broad spectrum of fields. We have a couple of clergy members. We have a number of historians. We have a number of constitutional attorneys. And if that isn't enough, we have 3 executive directors of national organizations that will be speaking, and believe me, any one of them would be enough to fill a room. And here we have 3 of them in one room. We have a Brent Walker, who is the executive director of the Joint Baptist Committee out of Washington D.C. We have Sarah Hutchinson, who is the executive director of the Catholics for Choice out of Washington D.C. And finally, we have our very own Barry Lynn, Executive Director of American United, will be the keynote speaker. So again, if you're at all interested in church-state issues, that's the place to be on April 20th. And it's for free, on-site parking, and Janice will be making lunch for everybody.
No. I will be making a beeline for the cafeteria with everybody. You
And
can follow me.
There's an on-site cafeteria, so it's all housed in one. And National Constitution Center is a real slick venue. We pay big bucks to rent this place. Very comfortable, very professional, and a very fitting venue for such a lofty event. So please come. And with that, I'd like now to introduce Fran Pierce. Fran is not only a member, an active member of the Delaware Valley chapters of Americans United, but she is also a long-term teacher and an activist. She has a lot of background in which she's going to be speaking in tonight. So without any further ado, Fran Pierce.
Thank you. Decide if you want to clap. But anyway, yours. I'm giving you 3 of these copies because they didn't copy back to back. They copied on separate pages. Okay, 1 page each. These are, you'll see front, back. I do that as much as possible because I'm one of these crazy conservation kind of people. First of all, my name's Fran. There's my name and my email address. The email address is hopefully not for you to send me hate mail, just to ask a question if you have something occurs to you later on and you want to ask a question, please feel free to do that. I'll be happy to answer it. And also, as we get into this, you'll see that what we're talking about, and you may decide that you want to get involved in a campaign of this kind. So you can certainly get in touch with Americans United. If you happen to have that and email me, I will be in touch with Americans. I'll pass you on to them. So you have many places to refer to as possible. I was a teacher for 5 years only, from 1970 to 1975 in Lancaster County. Whew, talk about an experience. After that, starting in 1976, I was a union organizer for non-teaching staff in schools throughout the eastern part of the state of Pennsylvania, and I did union organizing and grassroots organizing, issue organizing, and then eventually went directed the program. So I worked for that organization until I retired in 2004. Since 2004, I've been really having a lot of fun doing the things I really am passionate about, and this is one of them. My issues are public schools, and I believe very passionately in public schools and that we need to keep them strong. And this is an issue that I got involved with because I used to speak to student teachers about this issue, and I had a lot of young people ask me questions about, what do we do when children ask questions about religion, and when we're in the middle of class and we're not supposed to talk about that. So I did a lot of research on that and ended up getting very interested in realizing what was really going on. Then last year I attended a talk by Catherine Stewart. Did anyone attend the Catherine Stewart talk? Scared you out of your pants, right? So me too. And I got so fascinated by that I decided to do some of my own investigating, and I got involved with a campaign about not Good News Clubs, but another project that I'll mention briefly later on, in a public school two public schools actually in Chester County, which is where I live. So I've discovered that the Good News Clubs is only one little piece of it. There are lots of other ones, and they're very frightening, and they're everywhere. So I got involved in that, and then put this workshop together from some other pieces I had. So I hope you enjoy it. And the first thing we want to do is we want to define some terms. Now, this workshop is titled Fighting Stealth Evangelism in Public Schools. Stealth evangelism is kind of an oxymoronic term. What do we mean when we say evangelism? What do you think of when I say evangelism, if this person's evangelizing?
Proselytizing to other people, trying to get them to convert to your religion.
Exactly. Proselytizing, but in an open way, speaking, reading the Bible, standing, and you've seen them out on the street corner or whatever, as well as the people who come to your door and knock on your door and ask you, if you have a church and try to sell you there. So that's all evangelizing. It's also part of mission work and those kinds of things. It's open. It's not, people don't come to your door and say, hi, I want to sell you a roof, and then when you let them in, they start talking about religion. It's open. So stealth evangelism is an oxymoron, because stealth evangelism means evangelizing but trying to do it in a stealthy way and not telling the truth about it.
I'm just going to speak very briefly about my own experience. My parents, I was raised Catholic.
I was too.
And my parents were ordinary Catholics until I went away to college, and they met some people who asked them to come to a different kind of a service, you know, and they got involved in this thing called charismatic Catholic, which is basically, you know, speaking in tongues, all the stuff that you think of when you think of the crazy people that fall on the floor and twitch and everything, except they're still Catholics. And I remember that people that were in that movement would like invite you over their house for dinner, not telling you that they were going to start talking about this thing and try to get you involved in it. So
it's not a new thing.
Right.
That's right.
Right.
It goes way back, and I can absolutely identify with that. I was raised Catholic also, and I knew about those movements. My parents were kind of wacky Catholics because my dad was a college professor, which doesn't mean anything except that he was a little more open and searching, and my parents are what is today called Dorothy Day Catholics or Vatican II Catholics. And my mother still works, she's 86 years old, she still works in the soup kitchen and fights the parish priest all the time because he wants to close the soup kitchen. So they were always a little different, and I didn't even realize how different until I was much older. I practiced Catholicism for quite a few years after I left school, or left them, and then I figured I'd practiced long enough, and I wasn't getting any better at it, so I quit practicing. And so now I still call myself a person of faith, but of no religion, no particular religion. And I have a certain amount of faith depending on what I'm reading at the time. Sometimes I'm agnostic, sometimes I have faith, and it goes back and forth. But anyway.
Walk into the light. We'll take you all the way.
Yes, right. So anyway, so I've been interested in this as an issue of religious freedom, because I believe that religious freedom is absolutely critical to our way of life. Obviously it is. I don't have to talk anybody into that. You know, it'd probably be good if I had my glasses. Okay. So evangelism is what this is based on, but we're talking about a certain kind called stealth evangelism. Now, the purpose of this workshop is not to tell you what Americans United is going to do about this issue. It's also not to tell you how to go and sue somebody so that you could get this out of the schools, because that's really not a way that's appropriate for this. Number one, because the way the courts have been recently, they're basically not ruling that there's anything wrong with this. And number two, even if it were, I would not tell you to do that, because that is not a very productive way to approach this. But it is instead a workshop to help you to do something about it, or to be at least knowledgeable enough about it so that if you encounter it, you have some facts and figures and information that can help you point other people in the right direction. However, our wish, our hope, my hope at least, is that when you become aware of some situation that we're going to, such as this we're going to talk about, you will want to help to guide that group to do something about it. So the first thing I want to do is point you to the, oh, sorry, I didn't get it out yet. I haven't been a teacher for a very long time. One of the things that that has really been very distressing is that these efforts reach from very low elementary school all the way up to and through high school. And the one that you see in front of you is this is just obviously a page from a website. The website is called no, it's not Campus. Every Student, Every School. And the group has its focus, its goals, and you can see very clearly bullet number 2 is that they believe that every student should have the opportunity to know Jesus Christ personally. That's very nice of them. And their whole effort is to reach out to students and to serve schools for Christ. They make no bones about it. Under this website, if you go to this website and look through the information like the Get Started Here and the Do It and all that, you're going to see some very frightening things. Insofar as they believe that they must do this, they believe that they are right to do this, they believe that anybody who stands in their way is evil, un-American, all kinds of labels. But this, at least, is aimed at middle and high school students. Okay, what we see from the speaker that some of you saw last week, the woman that I saw that really turned me onto this, Catherine Stewart, and I've quoted her on the back of this. She had an experience where she was dealing with or coming up on these groups in the elementary schools. And they are looking for young people from the ages of 5, 6, kindergarten children. And she tells in the first paragraph, you can read it for yourself, it's just, these are excerpts from the introduction. She did what many people do, parents do, she just thought it was a harmless thing until she found out a little more about it. And the second paragraph, I think, is even more frightening because she talks about discovering that there are more than 3,500 of these programs in public elementary schools. I'm sure that 2 years ago when she wrote this book that was true. I'm sure it's double that. Maybe not double, but close to it now. So this particular handout tells you about efforts at the elementary level, at the high school level, and there are many, many more. One of the things that's referred to in this piece is how they get in through sports programs, etc. And Catherine also talks about how these groups get in through sports programs. So it is pervasive. It is not just at high schools where these students might have some thoughts or have had some education, or at middle schools where young people, 9th, 10th, 9th, 7th graders might be, at least have be able to think about these things. But to tiny children who accept that the fact that this is being taught or given in school makes it legitimate, makes it something that they must do, should do, or it's good to do, whatever. It has all of those kinds of connotations. Knowing that this is a terribly pervasive kind of issue, it's frightening when I tell you that we have AU has pursued these through the courts. Organizations, individuals have pursued these issues through the courts, and the courts have basically told us that, well, it's an after-school program, so nobody's forced to do it, so we think it's appropriate. And so you may be thinking to yourself, if it's that ingrained and there are that many of them, and the courts aren't on our side, what on earth could we possibly do to make this something that can go away, to help people understand how bad it is, and to see if we can't get rid of some of these. Well, there are lots of things that we can do short of going to court, and as I said, going to court is probably not the most productive way anyway. So on that note, turn over the agenda, and I just have for you to, as I said, a basis of knowledge, some of the legislative issues authorities that help to back up what it is that we hope to do and are about. And we're going to discuss those. And if you flip back onto the first side, what we want to do is we want to use the knowledge that we have and not reinvent the wheel. So we're going to look at the pieces that we already know, the things that work. And one of those is grassroots organizing. And Americans United has a fabulous, complete handbook on that. But I've taken 4 pieces out of that, and I will give you that handout a little later, that really hone in on the pieces of grassroots organizing that would be good for this effort. And the second thing is we know some things. We've seen some campaigns that have worked, and we can tell you what we know about that. So Americans United is not prepared to do this for you, but here's what we are prepared to do. We're prepared to help you understand the issue, to help you put together an effort if you're interested in doing that, and to tell you what has worked and what hasn't worked so that you're not reinventing the wheel. And that's very important, I think, especially when you're faced with such a huge problem. And what we're hoping that you will leave with are two things: legal basis and how, so that you can feel confident that you're on solid legal ground, and two, some strategies that we have felt that we've seen work and we know work and we think you can also do. So the necessary knowledge that I'm talking about covers all kinds of law, from the federal down to state and even local. So go back again then to the second side with where legislative authority is listed. And you'll see that there's three areas. The first is federal, the second is state, and then we talk about a little bit about the Pennsylvania School Code. The federal is really nothing other than the First Amendment and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Are you aware that the Constitution of the United States does not mention education anywhere? There's no right to education in the Constitution. It's simply not mentioned. Now, does that mean that the men, they were all men, in 1776 didn't think education was important? I don't think so. But the reality was very different in 1776. I mean, my God, they still thought everybody should run around and have a gun. But their reality was very different. So what do you think kept them from addressing the concept of universal education? Hello, come in, have a seat at the table. No, not at all.
Well, they weren't for universal anything. They weren't for universal voting.
Right.
They didn't even have. We didn't even have, popular elections for senators and congressmen.
Okay, so why was that? Who was allowed to vote?
Property males.
Property white males. And who did you have to be educated, to get an education? Property white males. So that was their world. That was their concept. That was their whole thing. That was what they understood. And it's very difficult for us from this perspective to look back and understand how they could have come up with such wonderful things, such as the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and be so short-sighted on other issues. But, we were evolving culturally, so, we weren't there yet. So the First Amendment to the Constitution, the Establishment Clause of that is the piece that we rely on for freedom of religion, and it basically says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise. Now, if you were one of those people that I have seen at some of these, or heard at some of these roundtables saying, well, I think I can read, and this is what the Constitution says, and it doesn't say a thing about separation of church and state. Well, you would be really exhibiting your ignorance, because of course it doesn't say that, but we rely not just on the words of the Constitution. We have a tripartite government. We also have the judicial branch, and the judicial branch's responsibility, the reason it is there, is to interpret the Constitution. So when judges interpret the Constitution, they're not going against what they're supposed to do. That's what they're supposed to do. And that's been happening for 200 years. So what we understand to be the law today, what we know to be the law today, based on what the courts have told us or have ruled, may not be explicitly stated in so many words in the Constitution. And it changes all the time. I say to people all the time, we had Dred Scott before we had, now it's gone out of my head.
Citizens United.
Well, yeah, Citizens United. But Dred Scott being the slaves are owner pieces of property, to the Brown versus Board of Education, where we had children, being recognized as needing an education. So, those are both Supreme Court cases. The court changes, it evolves, and it will evolve again. So there's no other direct references. However, in 1970, we finally established or 1969, we finally established a national, a seat at the table for the Department of Education, the department level of education. Up until that date, there was no Department of Education. It was all under health and welfare and health and human services and those kinds of things. Yes, I'm sorry.
You were saying that there's no direct reference to separation of church and state, but it can be drawn from there should be no law regarding the establishment of religion.
Absolutely.
You're talking about establishing religion, you're talking about endorsement of religion.
Absolutely.
Sometimes some people interpret that as endorsement of religion in the large sense of religion versus not religion.
Right. Yes, and fortunately we have lots of guidance from the courts that says, you know, it doesn't just mean that the country or the Congress cannot set up a religion. It means many other things, because what the law means relates to what it means to each individual person. Okay, so those individual rights are the things that have been interpreted. And yes, you're absolutely right. All of the rights that we understand flow from that language and flow from other. We're awake. Now?
The Scotch fault.
It's okay. It's okay. So yes, and that's the whole point, is that you cannot look simply at the narrow language and say, oh, that's what it means, because you have to have an understanding of all of the other things in our Constitution and in our Bill of Rights. And most importantly, you have to understand that the Bill of Rights was written to support the rights of the minority. The minority, not as we are frequently used it today, meaning racial minority. It was the rights of those who are not the major party or the major influence. Those folks, the majority, have the right of the ballot box. They are going to win their ideas through majority vote. But it is the ideas and the concepts and the beliefs of the minority that are protected by the Bill of Rights. So that you could not put something on the ballot in Philadelphia that says, here in Philadelphia there will not be freedom of the press, and if you get a majority of people saying, okay, you cannot destroy the right of freedom of the press in Philadelphia just because the majority believes in it. And that is why you cannot have children or parents vote to have prayer at graduation and the majority says yes, because you're still violating that particular right, obviously, the First Amendment. So those are kinds of things that you need to remember when your people talk to you with these crazy arguments about, well, we're in the majority, so isn't this a democracy? And obviously, you are too dumb to understand what a democracy is, so go back to school. Public school, preferably. Okay, so the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was passed in 1965. It was passed to allow federal funding of education. Education has a strange configuration in the United States in that it is controlled individually by the states. But the Federal Department of Education was looking for ways to enforce certain kinds of federal laws, such as integration and those kinds of things. And the only way they could do that was to offer a carrot, and that would be funding for certain programs. So by offering funding for programs and withholding those funds, if the schools or the states did not uphold their responsibilities under the federal law, they were able to have a little bit of control over what states did. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act established certain levels of responsibility for schools, and by doing that, they allowed funding from the federal level. And of course, at the federal level, there was a requirement that you had to follow the civil rights law. You had to do this, you had to follow this law, that law, and that law. So all of those laws do come into our schools, but not because the schools are under the federal government, but because instead the schools get funding from the federal government, and if they're going to do that, they need to abide by federal law. In 2001, it has to be reauthorized every 5 years, which is monumentally a pain, but but in that reauthorization in 2001, it was renamed by George Bush, No Child Left Behind, and it has unfortunately left a lot of children behind. So that's the law that is still in effect, that has been reauthorized obviously since 2001. But what you have to understand is that it is it is not a new law. It was not new in 2001. There were pieces of it that were new, but it was not a new law. All right, so at the state level, the state has a constitution that Ed referred to, and one of the things a lot of people forget is that there is a state level. We look right away to the federal level and say, wait, we should have freedom of religion. Well, we also have that established at the state level, and the state constitution is much broader, and there's the whole article of it, and it goes on to indefeasible right to worship God, and dictates no man can be compelled to attend or maintain a ministry or whatever. It's much more extensive than the First Amendment Establishment Clause. And it has been used in this state to defend and to keep certain pieces of public domain separate away from religious influence. Every state has a different constitution, and I think you will find that in many, although not all, in many states, definitely not in all, many states have clauses such as this one, especially in the northeast part of the country. So if you live in Delaware or New Jersey or somewhere nearby, you should look at that state constitution, because the Constitution of Pennsylvania is nothing. It means nothing for your schools and doesn't help you, because they are not, your schools in your states are not at all affected by the state constitution. However, the states have complete control over education laws, and in Pennsylvania, it is a law called, under the Constitution, it is established that we have to have public schools, and they have to be supported by the state, and also that specifically, under Section 15 of the state constitution specifically, no money raised for the support of the public schools of the Commonwealth shall be appropriated to or used for the support of any sectarian school. So we have a lot firmer ground to take something to the state courts than we do to the federal courts. However, the state court could rule in your favor if you decided to take this case up, and a person, because this is a situation where there's also a federal law covering that, they could appeal to a federal court, and you could lose it at that level. So that's another reason why we suggest that that's not a good route to go. Last thing there is the Pennsylvania School Code, and the Pennsylvania School Code is an extremely comprehensive law with volumes and volumes and volumes that covers everything to do with public schools in Pennsylvania. Every state has its own school laws. Pennsylvania's are very extensive. Within the Pennsylvania School Code is the language about allowing public teachers and education employees to bargain collectively, to go on strike, in addition to a public employee bargaining law. So it's within the school code that all of those things happen. Teacher certification, curriculum, how you hire a superintendent, how are the school boards elected, what they're allowed to spend, what the funding formula is. All of that is in the school code. So without a knowledge of those things, you cannot go forward in trying to fight some of these issues. Now, that is not said to intimidate you or to make you feel as though there isn't anything you can do. Quite the opposite. Because there is so much that covers these schools, there are lots of ways to skin this cat. Just because we can't take a case to the Supreme Court of the United States does not mean that there is nothing we can do, because there are lots of other little nooks and crannies we can look at. Yes?
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. So what
No,
you're
please
saying is what is said in the state constitution doesn't have any bearing upon what goes on in schools relating to this issue?
No, not at all.
And the reason for this is?
No, I'm disagreeing with you.
Oh, okay.
What is in the state constitution absolutely affects state schools.
Oh, okay.
But the problem with it is that it could be overturned by a higher level court.
Okay.
Okay. So we would not rely solely on that language to take a court case, thinking that that was going to be the be-all and end-all, because we know that once it's appealed to the federal level, it could be overturned.
Okay.
Okay, so with all of that, we've covered a little bit about the legal basis of our position. and that means that we know that there are ways that we can deal, and but we need to understand what those laws are and how to use them. The internet has certainly made this a lot easier. You can Google almost any issue, like the one, like an issue of stealth evangelism, and what you'll find is that there's lots of information about situations in individual schools. In Pennsylvania, and that brings us to this next handout. In Pennsylvania, we are, oh man, my computer did not print both sides of some of these. There are lots of, thank you, there's a very complicated structure, and you need to understand that if you're going to, again, get involved in this kind of a fight. And that is because, as I said earlier, in order for states to have, to provide education, they've had to have the laws passed within the state. So in the case of Pennsylvania, we have the school code, but we also, within the school code, which it is the school code which sets up this structure. And school districts, first of all, there are 501 school districts in the state of Pennsylvania. Unlike the state of Maryland, where there are, I think, 19 in the entire state, because they are county-wide. In Pennsylvania, they have this very old-fashioned local control. You'll hear the term local control. That means the locals want to have a vote and say what happens in the school. So you get small school boards duplicating a lot of effort right next to each other over and over again, and wasting a lot of money, and chances of that ever getting voted out and changed are, we've seen snowballs in certain places with more chance than that, because it is a power structure primarily, and it is a very, very long tradition of local control of those issues. So, the beginning of this just simply says that state by state, but if you're curious why it happens state by state, look into the biographies of Horace Mann, John Dewey, Daniel Webster, and other people. It happened first in Massachusetts based on some models in Europe, and then other states followed. And once the states got all these set up, the federal government wasn't going to come in and establish a federal system, because the states had their own systems set up, and so they then established by state law that this was a state right. So states stood by the right to have their own systems of education. As a result, we have 50 different education systems in this country, which is part of our problem. We have 544 school entities. This says school districts. 544 school entities, 501 school districts. Traditional school districts are geographic. School entities include things such as vocational schools that are not affiliated, not attached to school districts. Other kinds of schools that actually includes community colleges also. So it makes it difficult for the state to know and understand what goes on in each district, and allows very kind of nurtures these kinds of efforts for stealth evangelists, because the state is not really, you know, it's hard to get a handle on all of those, even if you would want to, which they obviously don't. So the education hierarchy in Pennsylvania starts with the governor and the legislature. So everything that is done, said, purchased in a public school in Pennsylvania is a political decision. Everything. Everything, from the amount of chalk you have to whether you have chalk, whether you have blackboards or whiteboards. Everything is a political decision. Why? Because school boards are elected. School boards are elected, except in, well, they are elected, but they have a lot of power, except in certain larger districts like Philadelphia, where they can't directly tax, but the other part of their structure is the same. School boards are elected. They are the ones who choose the superintendents of each school district. So the superintendent is beholden to this elected board. If people don't like the superintendent, they can get on a bandwagon and change the school board, bringing in a school board on the concept that they want to get rid of the superintendent. So the school board, the superintendents are beholden to this elected board. The school boards are the bottom of the barrel in terms of the hierarchy. It starts with the governor and the legislature. Nothing can be done unless it's done by the legislature. The governor does not control education in Pennsylvania, the legislature does. So the funding, the curriculum are all under the legislature. And so the Department of Education that is responsible for curriculum answers to the legislature. Okay, so that makes every decision in public school in Pennsylvania and in most states political decisions. The Secretary of Ed is appointed by the governor, changes as the governor's office changes. Having worked in school stuff for 30 years, when we would be in the middle of a project and they're pushing for this thing and we want to do this and every school district's going to have it and it's going to be, and then the governor gets changed and the new governor says, I'm going to get rid of these folks, the head of the Department of Ed, this person, the undersecretary, put all my people in. Nope, that goes out the window and we're going to have a new effort. And that happens not only in Pennsylvania, but it happens in many, many, many states. So it's very difficult to have any kind of continuity. Under the State Department of Ed, there are things called intermediate units. Anybody ever hear of intermediate units? Intermediate units are essentially intermediate geographic units that combine school districts in order to provide education in areas where school districts may not be terribly efficient. If we had, ideally, an intermediate unit would be a school district. In Chester County, for example, the Chester County Intermediate Unit is composed of 14 school districts. All of those districts pay money into the intermediate unit. They each send a person from their school board as a representative on the intermediate unit board, and the intermediate unit can provide certain things that school districts may not have the money for. So in the early days, they provided special education almost exclusively. They provided for profoundly deaf children or blind children. So this was the way that the public schools were able to take care of those particular needs. And then it evolved, and so when things like driver's ed were like, who needs that? Throw that out. That's not on the test, so we don't have to teach that. The intermediate unit would provide it. School district would have to pay the intermediate unit to have that service, and all of the school districts pay into their particular intermediate unit to receive services. They have, some of them have become huge and very good providers, in terms of not wasting money because they're providing it to a large number of students. Generally speaking, they provide vocational education for the school districts, so they make a lot of sense. But that's another level of, hierarchy. And then under that, you see local school districts. And local school districts are called LEAs in legislative matters. When you read legislation, state legislation, it says the LEA shall. You'll see that in the test score thing. The LEAs have an elected board of directors, and then their own superintendents of schools, and then under him or her, it's usually him, district administrators. And then under those people, we have all of these other kinds of administrators. Directors of curriculum, assistant superintendents, director of elementary ed, director of middle school, director of secondary, director of special ed, principals, blah, blah, blah. So you have lots of administrators under that head. And all of those people answer to the superintendent and the school board. And the superintendent and the administration effectively do the hiring of all other staff. So we're talking about everybody, if your school district has its own bus system, bus drivers, cleaners, cafeteria people, mechanics, maintenance, custodial, secretarial, all of those things are hired essentially by the principals of the schools. Believe me, the superintendent of the school board do not care and do not want to know who those folks are, except when they come up to vote on them. The school board, however, must vote on those folks. So, they just get a bunch of names, and the principal says, oh, this person's really great, hire them, and the school board goes, okay. But they have to give that final stamp. So then way down at the bottom, you have those folks. The individual classroom teachers and the support staff or all of those other people. So those folks are just as responsible for knowing and following the laws of the state, the federal, the state, and the local school district rules, school board policies as everybody else. Ignorance of those regulations is never allowed to be an excuse for not enforcing. For example, the principal in Philadelphia who did not adequately watch when that child was abducted, she can be legally taken to court and held responsible, separate from the school district, which can also be sued. But that person can legally be sued for what happened to that child. if she did not know that there was a school district law or rule about that, no excuse. Okay, so those folks have gazillion laws and rules that they have to understand and know about. Under that is, I put teachers' unions because that's how we all think of them, but they're really educational unions. They're unions for teachers as well as for educational staff, support staff. And in Pennsylvania, all teachers and many support staff, non-teaching staff, in the public schools, in every public school district and entity in the state are represented by unions. There is a union in every school district in this state, let's put it that way. And they can choose between, for the professional staff, the teaching staff, they can choose between the American Federation of Teachers, which is an AFL-CIO local, or the Pennsylvania State Education Association, which is under the National Education Association. That's who I worked for. I worked for the Pennsylvania State Education Association for 33 years. But very similar with a couple of differences. Support staff can belong to AFSCME, SEIU, they can belong to Teamsters, they can belong to whatever union comes in and organizes them. And that's a whole other story. However, the unions, the AFT or the AFL-CIO or the NEA can help those teachers to lobby for things or whatever, but they can't, the teachers' unions cannot get up and say, we want to get rid of this organization. They do not have those kinds of rights. So I'm saying that because very often people say, well, why would the teachers' union put up with this? Why would they let this in? They don't have any right to do any of those kinds of interventions. What they have to do is stealth, just like what we would have to do as we set up a response to these. So understanding that hierarchy is critical to knowing where you start when you want to fight one of these organizations. If you don't understand that hierarchy, you will make, believe me, you will make basic, fatal mistakes. Chances are you believed, before we had this little talk, that if you wanted something done, you went to the school board and complained. Wrong. They know nothing about what's going on in the school buildings. So there are ways that you need to understand how to get the information you need, how to use the information you need to the best it can be used. Especially knowing that those administrators are beholden to the superintendent and beholden to the school board, and their entire world is based on that school board. Their entire world is based on getting re-elected. Okay, so that means, what do they want? No controversy, none, zero. They don't want to hear from you. They don't want to hear from teachers. They don't want to hear from their principals. They want no controversy, because every time they come out and say they're for or against something, they lose votes. That is their primary focus. Now, are there school board members that are in it for the real right reasons? Yes. Maybe this many. But generally speaking, once they get in there, and that's not really being fair, there are wonderful school board members, and I have met some who are in our corner and believe this and anti-voucher and everything, but there are a lot of them who just want to get reelected. So it's very difficult to get, going to court, filing a case is not going to do anything but cause havoc and get all the wrong hackles up. Yes?
Is being on the school board a paid position?
No, oh my goodness, no. It's an elected position. They do get perks, certain kinds of perks, depending on the school district, but no, it's not paid. It's pretty much absolutely difficult, thankless, awful job. Nobody in their right mind would want to do it nowadays with the state of education the way it is. Okay, so we've looked at local political structure, and the last thing I want to talk about is parental rights. Parents are in a much stronger position right now than they have ever been, because they have begun to recognize that they can influence what happens in a school district. They can make havoc for a principal or an assistant principal or a teacher or a bus driver or whatever, and they can do that effectively by bringing certain issues to the fore. But generally speaking, they need numbers to do that, or they need an issue that is so pervasively accepted, like child safety or something, that without that kind of an issue, they're not going to be terribly effective. So for a parent, for a single parent, or even 2 or 3 parents to get up and say that having these good news clubs in school and we shouldn't have it is not going to do anything. Those are great places to start, but they will need much more strength and assistance before they are able to be successful. That's what we would like to help them to do. I'm working right now with a group in Westchester School District, and they are doing wonderfully, and they're finding all kinds of things to help them out. What are those things? Okay.
Which school district is this?
Westchester School District.
I was from there.
Yes. There's a lot of good news clubs there.
That's disappointing.
I know. It is. Believe me. There are everywhere. They also had a little project called Amnion that they allowed into the middle and high schools that was supposed to teach relationship education, as long as it was heterosexual relationship and within marriage. And they were allowed in the schools. Anyway, so we didn't get them out in Westchester. We did get them out of
Did you
downtown.
say
But
it's called?
Amnion, is that a weird word?
It sounds
Like-
scientific.
Oh, yeah. Amniocentesis, amniotic fluid, you know. What
Sounds like a drug that needs to be recalled.
They need to be recalled, believe me. Yes, they're very, very strange people. And if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay. Anyway, so what can you do? Well, what I've put together from what Americans United really did is a couple of pages from their grassroots organizing manual, because we're not really organizing, from scratch here. We're doing some specific, focused kinds of organizing on this specific issue. And really, all organizing is issue organizing. And this particular type of organizing really can be defined in a step-by-step way, which is good because you can get a handle on it. But the very first thing and the most important thing you must do is start with research. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I've just given you a huge amount of references to many different kinds of laws. And believe it or not, one of the things that you're going to have to do if you want to attack a problem of this kind is do some research on the laws. What covers this? So in other words, if you find that there is a Good News Club operating in an elementary school in your school district, the first thing you need to do is find out what the rules are of the school. And unless you have that and you know that there's a violation of that by this group, you're nowhere. You could go out there and preach to every parent that this is wrong, but unless you have something concrete that you can make trouble with for that principal, who doesn't want trouble, remember, you won't get anywhere. So research is critical. Again, the internet is absolutely invaluable because nowadays you used to have to make an appointment, go to the district administration office, and have the administrative person there, secretary, whatever, look up for you the school school board policy on that issue, show it to you, and you had to pay to have it copied. That's how you used to have to find out about board policies. Nowadays, you can find them on the internet. They're hidden, as a couple of our board members found out, but they're there. So there are 2 levels. There's school building rules, and then the next level up is school board policy. So the first thing is school building rules. And what you might find what you will find within any given school district is that if there are 5 elementary schools, there are 5 different sets of school building rules. They're probably going to be mostly similar, but the parents in those buildings have tinkered with those rules. So for example, Johnny's mother, who's president of PTA in Building A, Johnny has an allergy to peanuts, so there's a rule in that school that nothing with peanuts can be brought to a classroom party. That's a school rule in that school. It's not a rule in school B because nobody there has made us think about being allergic to peanuts. You may, however, have enough kids allergic to peanuts that there's actually a school board policy about it. You never know, but you start with the school building. If you can find enough dirt to help you to fight that organization that you're trying to get rid of at the school building level, you have a good start. Maybe you won't, so the next level up is the school board policies. What kinds of school board policies? Well, you want to find out if there are building use policies, if there are club policies, if there are pre- and post-school policies, if there are policies about whether or not teachers need to be involved in a school club. All of those kinds of things will be found in school board policy. Where do you find school board policy? When you go onto your school district's website, the first thing you're going to see is, the school board website will come up. And then usually over on the right, there are little things you can click on, and one will say for administration, and one will say for parents, and one will say for kids, and teachers, staff, or whatever. And one of them will be school board. And unless you are in the know, you would never know that that's where you have to click to find the policies that govern the school that are not state law. So you have to go to school board, and under school board, then there will, when it comes up, usually across the top, there will be tabs, and one of those tabs, or down the side, one of those tabs will be board policies. And when you find that, you've hit the mother lode, because it's huge. But it's usually very easily searchable. And it appears to me that most districts, at least in this area, have used the same company to do these sites because they are very, very similar. They look the same kind of font, everything. So when you find the school board policies, you can search for building policies, you can search for rental, you can search for after-school clubs, you can search for all kinds of things. And what you will see when you go into those policies is when it was written, what it says, of course, when it was written, and they're not terribly long and they're pretty readable. They're not too much legalese. When it was written, and when it was recently renewed or reviewed and passed, and most school districts have their policies on a cycle so that they will review all of their building policies in year 1, all of their curriculum policies in year 2, and blah, blah, blah. So you can see kind of how long ago. Why is that important? It's important because if it has relatively recently been approved or reapproved, then the people who are currently on the school board voted for it. And if they voted for a policy that is now being violated, you can go to that board and say, a policy that you approved is being violated by your principal. They don't appreciate that. You can also go to the principal and say, I'm sure the school board would not like to hear that a policy that they just put in last year and that 8 of the 9 of them voted yes on, you're violating. And they get real nervous about that. So those are the places where you have the most success, not taking it to court, even though it's clearly, I think, a violation of church and state. So research is absolutely critical. So you already have 2 levels of research. You have building level, and then you have district level. Don't forget, however, that there are people between those policies. Okay, there are people who carry them out. And 9 times out of 10, the people who carry them out, including the principals in many cases, didn't make the policies, may not approve of the policies, and you may have an ear with them. And how do you find that out? Well, you don't find it out by going to them and saying, do you approve of this? Because it's official policy, they're going to say, yeah, of course I approve of it. The school board says I have to. But you can find out by doing your research about who's there, who is in that group. And the only way you can do that in a school building setting is by knowing the players, and that takes time. It's not easy, and it takes time, and we're going to talk about a little bit about that down the road. So after you've done a bunch of research, and again, AU's national office can certainly help you. Then you go on to community outreach, and the reason why you want to do that is because if there's a group that exists that's already dealing with this issue in your school district, don't start a new one. If you have a PTO, and the PTO has certain, did I just get chalk on me? I probably did. If the PTO is open-minded, and you happen to know someone on it, that's a great place to start. But you may also look to, in this case, a progressive church, a Unitarian group, a group of another group, some friends who in Americans United, some whatever. You can look for those kinds of allies who already exist, who may not be aware of this. In this case, because it is clearly a an evangelistic Christian group, you may want to look to see how many Jewish children are in your building. Sometimes those